Hi, I'm Marc Spagnuolo from the woodwhisperer.com. Now in this month's Wood Whisperer column, I discussed routers and some of my favorite tips and tricks that I like to use in my shop. Now honestly, these are really just things that I wish I knew when I first started routing. It would have saved me a whole lot of heartache. Now, one of the coolest things that I learned about routing was the use of a flush trim bit. They come in all different shapes and sizes, but really they're all based on the same principle. So let's take a close look at some of the ones that I have on hand, and then later on I'll even show you how I use a pattern bit to create these keepsake boxes that I'm making for the holidays. Now here are 4 bits that I have in my collection. The basic anatomy is the same from one to the other. They've got 2 blades and a bearing. The bearing is in perfect alignment with that blade so that as the bearing rides across a guide or some sort of pattern, the blade is able to trim any excess material away. Now the key difference between these, you'll notice the first 3 are all the same. This one is slightly different. The bearing is located closer to the shaft on this one. Now typically when I shop for these, I notice that they'll call this a pattern bit, but these 3 are called the more generic name, which is the flush trim bit. So keep an eye out for that. The other thing to look for is whether the blades are straight or whether they're at an angle. This is a little bit more expensive, this particular bit, but it gives you a cleaner cut because you're cutting at this slightly skewed angle, just like when you skew a hand plane or you buy a helical head for a planer or a jointer. Now if you're wearing socks, prepare for them to be knocked off, because this is the bit to rule them all. This is one that I picked up at the William Ing School and has a lot of cutter heads at a very severe angle here. So this helical style head on this thing is going to trim just about any hardwood, no matter how gnarly, no matter how hard, and you're going to get a pretty darn clean cut even on end grain here. So this is not cheap, but very sexy. Now as a quick example, let's say we wanted to cut a nice curve using this template into this block of 8/4 cherry. I'm just going to attach the template to the 8/4 using some double stick tape. Now there are a number of ways you could handle this. One example would be to use a pattern bit with a handheld router and just run it along this way. You could also take a standard flush trim bit, put that into a router table, let's pretend that's my router table, and you'd be able to run it along this way. And if all you have is a pattern bit, you can even put that in the router table, flip the workpiece over, and you could run it along like so. Now over the years, I've accumulated a lot of these little 1/4-inch plywood templates just for various different projects, and I always hold on to them, label them with the date, what the project was, and even if I don't ever make that project again, some of these things really come in handy. Like this nice curve is perfectly symmetrical. It worked great on that project, but you know what? It comes in handy for a lot of other things too. Here's another example. This is a big leg template that I used to make these big armoire legs a couple years ago. So the idea here is you would take this on a very large 8/4 piece of material. Oops. I would use the template, draw the shape onto the leg with a marker or a pencil. I take it over to the bandsaw, trim off the excess, and then I go back to the router table, I double stick tape the template onto the workpiece, and then I use one of my flush trim bits to clean up the extra material. It's a great way to get perfect copies, and when you need to make 4 of these things, you need perfect copies. So a template is the way to go. Now I'm making a bunch of these little keepsake boxes here for the holidays, and they've got a secret little lock here, little pin that locks it in place, and a lid slides off on a nice little dovetail. But what I want to show you guys today is how I create the little cavity on the inside, and I use a pattern bit and a handheld router to do that. So let's jump in. I've got a piece of scrap here and I'll show you exactly how I do it. So I'm going to use my little circle template here to trace a circle onto the surface. And now I'm going to go over to the drill press and use a Forstner bit to clean out the bulk of this material. Now I've got a pattern bit mounted in my router here, and you'll notice that the bit itself is not really going to be long enough to go all the way down. We're not going to get the full depth out of it. So a cool trick is to go as far as you can, bring the bearing even with the template, and go around as far as you can, and that will create, I would say, 3/4 of the depth that we need. Then you can plunge down a little bit further, and now the bearing will ride on the wood, and the wood will serve as the guide for the rest of the cut until we get to the depth that we need. So it's a two-step process, but it works really well. So let's jump in and start hogging away some of this material. So you can see what we've done so far is we've cleaned out the bulk of the material. We've got about 1/4 of an inch roughly to go here. So we're going to lower the bit in the router. We're going to clean out the rest of the material, and now the bearing is going to ride on the wood itself. Now we can remove the template. And you can see what we're left with is a nice, smooth, even hole. There's a little bit of burning here and there, but that can be fixed with a little bit of sandpaper. So as you can see, flush trim bits are just one of the reasons that the router is one of the most versatile multitaskers in our shops. So hopefully you'll be able to take some of those tips and tricks from the column and what you saw here today, apply it to your shop, and make some great things. Thanks for watching.